Judging academic debate. The first thing that I would like to say is thank you so much for being here today and going through this training. And thank you for volunteering your time to be judges, because this activity really cannot exist without people like you who are willing to give up your time, your mental energy with the tournament and so forth. So we really, really appreciate you taking the time to be a judge and be here this morning. But the four things we will talk about are principles of judging. I'm actually not going to spend a whole lot of time on that because Richie's video actually goes into some of those principles on judging, but I do want to emphasize a couple of things that I particularly care about and think are important. Also, getting you to understand what academic debate really is, because I think that's fundamental also to being a good judge. Then we'll talk about how you fill out a ballot, what actually goes into it. Richie's presentation talks about the logistics of tab room and like what you do, how you access your ballot and stuff like that. When I say filling out a ballot, I'll be talking about what goes on that ballot. What should you be thinking about as you fill out your comments and things like that. And then I'll talk a little bit at the end about the main high school debate formats. Okay, 5 principles of judging. There are 5 things that I think are incredibly important for you to keep in mind as you are a judge. The first is that your goal is to be an educator. You need to be independent. You need to practice what we call non-intervention. Understand and recognize that there are multiple decisions being made. And so any given decision you make isn't the end decision, and it doesn't ruin somebody's life if you make a bad call, so to speak. And then lastly, occupying space. I'll talk about each of those 5 things. I do want you to realize or think about that those first 4 principles are applicable to any judging you do for speech and debate, whether you're judging policy debate, extemporaneous speaking, humorous interpretation of literature, anything you judge in competitive speech and debate, those first 4 principles are relevant. Occupying space is something that's specific, at least in my mind, to debate. So what do I mean when I say be an educator? The activity is fundamentally about something more than wins and losses. As a coach, I don't care much about win-loss records. I don't care much about trophies, speaker awards, championships, and things like that. That's not what matters to me. It certainly was a driving factor for me when I was a high school and a college competitor. But years later, I realized that there are very few things that I can look back at and tell you, oh yeah, I won this tournament, or I did poorly at this tournament. That's not what matters to me. What matters to me now are the relationships that I built during my time in the activity and the things that debate taught me. And so when you're going into a debate round to be a judge, your primary purpose in being there is to be an educator, to help students learn, to help students grow, and so forth. A big part of being an educator then is also being constructive in your comments rather than destructive. Right? We don't want to spend all of our time just pointing out each and every little thing that the student did wrong and making them feel badly. You should be thinking about giving input to those competitors on what they could have done better. Pointing out something like, hey, it really didn't make sense when you were talking about this. I think it would have helped if you had done, and then explain what it is that you think they could have done better. Right? Help to build them up. That's not usually a problem that we have with parent judges, community members of the judges. That actually has more to do with individuals who are former debaters, recent graduates who come back to the activity and they just like zero in on every single thing that they think that the debater did wrong. But for the most part, be constructive and think about how you can help them to grow. Second, your job as a judge is to be the sole decision maker. In the words of President Bush, you are the decider, right? You are making the decisions. You are not consulting other individuals. You're not going out onto the internet to fact check students. You're not turning to the person next to you. In fact, there's a major problem. Aside from the fact that it's against the rules and you're supposed to be making these decisions by yourself, you never know who that person who might be sitting next to you is. I used to be the league director in St. Louis for the St. Louis Urban Debate League. And I had a judge from the community. He was a professor at St. Louis University. And he was really stressed out about doing the right thing by the students. He was really concerned with thinking through all of the issues, and he was incredibly cerebral, and he was like, am I considering all of the facts? Did I consider this? Does this matter? And he was working through all of these issues, and he got to a point that he decided that he would turn to the person who was next to him. So I guess more context, the debate round was over, the debaters left the room, there was another adult in the room who was sitting just a few desks away from him. And so he turned to that individual and he said, hey, I was listening to the students talk about this issue, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on whether or not it's relevant to the debate, whether or not it was something that should guide my opinion. And so this person who was sitting in the room proceeded to explain why he did not think that that argument was relevant and shouldn't be considered in the debate. It turns out it was the coach of one of the teams in the room, and he was proceeding to direct this judge away from voting for the other team in the round. Unethical? Absolutely. Like, that person never should have done that and knew better than to communicate. But in terms of a lesson learned for us as judges, right, you don't know who the other people in this room, who they are. It could be the parent of one of the debaters, it could be a coach, it could be a friend, you never know. And so resist that temptation to confer with other individuals. Your job in this activity is to be the independent decider on the issues. Third, we practice non-intervention as judges. We like to call ourselves blank slates, even though none of us are truly blank slates. But it's important for you to think about that when you're judging a debate, you're not determining the round based on what you believe to be valid arguments. Right? It's not whether or not you agree with the arguments that the debaters are running. That should not guide your decision making. A student can stand up and say something that is absolutely factually untrue. And if I'm judging that round, if the other team doesn't call them out on that, then the argument stands. I am not playing the role of fact checker in that debate. Right? It is incumbent upon the opposing team to point out that that information was incorrect, and then to explain why they know that it was incorrect and how that should impact my decision making. You also, when you're thinking about the validity of those arguments, think about the idea that these students are not choosing which side of the debate topic to defend, right? They are sent into a room and they are told which side they are going to defend. So there's a 50-50 chance that the students don't agree with the arguments they're running either, right? So do your best to practice non-intervention. Strategic choices, that one's again for former debaters more than it is for community members, because former debaters tend to come into the activity and think about, this is how I would have handled this argument in the debate, or this is what I would have done. And they sometimes get hyper-focused on that and lose sight of the bigger picture of what was actually happening in the round. And then last, be aware of implicit bias. Each and every one of us has some form of implicit bias, things that we like, things that will affect us, and just be aware that those things exist. A number of studies are being done around the country to show, for example, that judges more harshly evaluate female competitors' aggressiveness, quote unquote, in the debate space and hold that against them. Whereas the male debaters tend to be rewarded for that aggressiveness, or what is perceived to be aggressive, and there's differences in what is perceived to be aggressive as well. Do your best to check yourself, to not allow yourself to be taken over by that. Another example is dress and appearance, right? A lot of students dress up for speech and debate competitions. Most coaches encourage their debaters to dress up, but we don't know the circumstances of each and every debater who comes into the room. I was at one of the national championship tournaments a few years ago, and I happened to see a team as I was walking back to the judges' lounge. I saw the teams that were in the room, and there was a team that was from an urban debate league that had gotten some donations in order to allow them to even travel to this tournament, and they were dressed in their everyday attire, hoodies and jeans, and the judge happened to walk out of that room as I was walking past, and we ended up in the judges' lounge at the same time, and I proceeded to hear that judge telling everyone else in the room how appalled she was that these debaters were disrespectful to the activity and disrespectful to every other single person who came to the national championship by not wearing a suit. And so she voted against them purely because they were not dressed up like everyone else. They clearly didn't care about the activity. They clearly didn't care about other people's time because they weren't wearing suits, right? The reality is she did not know their circumstances. She did not know what led them to that tournament and how they got there, what their economic situation was, and so forth. I don't either, to be honest. I have no idea what brought them there. I do know that those students cared deeply about the activity. I was also listening to them in the halls later on. It wasn't that they were trying to be disrespectful. So just be aware of the fact that we have implicit bias and recognize that we also don't know everybody's circumstance. Fourth, multiple decisions. I highlight this one because so many community members are afraid to judge because they are concerned that they're going to break a student's career or ruin their chances to do well. And they don't want all of that pressure on them. I talk about multiple decisions to help you recognize that you don't need to put that much pressure upon yourself. There are multiple preliminary rounds. We do that for a reason. It protects us against an errant judge's decision or a bad single performance by a competitor, right? We can recover from it. It's just like in professional sports. Like, I'm a football fan. You know, a team can go 9-7 over the course of a season, 9 wins and 7 losses, and still advance to the playoffs, right? A single round of competition does not end somebody's season, doesn't end somebody's tournament, doesn't end somebody's career, right? There are multiple decisions being made. So yes, you want to strive to make the best possible decision and be as fair as you can be, but take comfort in knowing that this one round is not the end of everything. Likewise, you may have the 2 best debate teams in the country randomly assigned to debate each other in round 1 of a tournament, and you might be stressing out and going, oh my gosh, they were so good and I don't want to give either of them a loss. Well, the reality is that one round is not going to by itself prevent them from advancing to elimination rounds. And once you get to elimination rounds, we have multi-judge panels, which means you, again, even though now we're in a single elimination format of moving students to the next round of competition, your ballot is not the only one being cast. There are 3 or 5 or 7 judges, depending on the tournament, making their decisions. And ultimately, we add up those ballots and allow them to move forward. And then the last one, occupying space. Right now, all I'm going to say is that what we find is that one of the ways that debaters win rounds, or one of the major ways that they win rounds, is by occupying space in the judge's mind, metaphorical space in the judge's mind. The teams that do the best job at taking over space in your brain, controlling the field of play, so to speak, are the ones who are likely to win. Not going to go into a lot of detail on that right now because it comes up later on when we're talking about what's happening in a debate round.